Robert Kaplan is with us. He is, of course, with Ian Bremmer's Eurasia Group as well. Robert, let's do geography with Robert this morning. Bring up the map, if you would, right now. The idea here of China, we all know that. And, of course, the rest of us are in Hong Kong or having a martini at the Peace Hotel in Shanghai. Kaplan isn't. Kaplan is not in West China over here, always controversial. Kaplan's way over here in western Pakistan. What would you tell President Trump off the Persian Gulf why he needs to focus on western Pakistan?
Where the circle is on the map, Tom, is southwestern Pakistan, where the Chinese have already built a major state-of-the-art port, which they plan to connect all through Pakistan north to western China. And now, just west of Gwadar and Jiwani, the Chinese are planning to build a vast naval base, meaning in 20, 30 years, if we don't do our alliance building correctly, the Chinese may be able to dominate militarily the Persian Gulf.
So if you're having lunch with Admiral Stavridis of the Fletcher School, can you two decide on the size of the Navy, the projection of the United States Navy, and the ability of this administration to show the flag worldwide?
I think we could. I think we would have a Navy that's at least 300 warships. Trump wants 355, but frankly, for a lot of reasons, that's beyond our capacity, because ships have to be serviced, they have to be built. Just keeping up the number of 300 is going to be a great challenge, because a lot of our ships are going to be decommissioned over the next 10 or 20 years. So a 300 warship Navy that is kind of layered out, not just in the Western Pacific, but across the Indian Ocean, making use of Oman, for instance, which is on the map, a very loyal U.S. ally, but very quiet and low-key, and other places, we would have presence, distribution across the Indo-Pacific.
Thursday Geography with Kaplan. Bring up the map one more time. Here's Oman down here, a good ally, and here's this small country called Iran. The president of Iran was in Germany and Austria, I guess, over the weekend, talking to Iran. How's our relationship with Iran? Do you want an Obama relationship or a Trump relationship with Iran?
Actually, at this point, I think an Obama relationship would be wiser. But you're pointing at two extremes. Obama tried to warm up ties, or at least deconflict our nuclear situation with Iran, but without reassuring allies like Saudi Arabia and Israel. That was the mistake. That was the missing part of the Obama policy. But the Trump policy is to essentially be aggressive without going anywhere, while alienating the Europeans, and also making it more difficult for Iran to politically evolve internally. Because what's going to determine the future of Iran is nothing we do very much. It's Iran's very complex 80 million people population and all the political forces within that are hurt by what we've been doing
Robert
recently.
Kaplan, let me bring in my colleague in London, Anna Edwards. Anna, good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you, Robert. Very good to speak to you. Pleasure to have you on the program today. You mentioned at the beginning there that if the American administration builds its alliances correctly, and as we head towards NATO, you've mentioned the alienation perhaps of some European countries. Is the Trump administration building its alliances correctly, either within the Persian Gulf or more broadly?
No, it's not. The Trump administration is rhetorically dismantling our alliances, because the first step of alliance building is reassurance. It's the illusion of permanence, that you will always be there for your allies. And that's a very moral proposition. I don't mean moral in the moralistic or humanitarian way. I mean it in the sense of our word can be trusted over the long term. And only if that happens can we then get our allies to do more, to raise up their defense budgets, to cooperate more with tariffs or trade or whatever. But if the United States signals that it is not going to be there for our allies, the ultimate reality is going to be that Germany, for instance, may have no choice but to, over time, move closer to Russia.
Yes, indeed. And the UK has its reservations, of course, about the Trump-Putin meeting that is coming. What are your reservations about what could be discussed and what the outcome could be between those two gentlemen?
Do you mean the meeting with Putin?
Yeah, in Helsinki.
Yeah. Here's the problem. Trump has lavished praise on Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who runs a suffocating, totalitarian, proliferating regime. He has bickered and fought and, in a way, humiliated our democratic allies in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so now the danger is that he will lavish praise on Putin. And lavishing praise on an adversary or a rival is okay, provided you've already reassured your allies. It's all about context. And the context is completely missing. Right. So that anything good Trump may say about Putin, in order merely to be polite, is going to be read the wrong way.
Robert Kaplan, so much of this is about land and water, and you've made a life study of this in the Atlantic and in your new book. John Mearsheimer at Chicago talks about the stopping power of water. We look at Russia as a landmass. They've got a southern view that they've always been worried about. But as George Will writes today in the Washington Post, there's Estonia, Latvia, the Baltic states, and that involves water. Tell us about the Baltic states in my naivete, our listeners and viewers' naivete, but most importantly, the president's naivete about
this. All right. The greater Baltic Sea basin is a bit too narrow for not for submarines, excuse me, but for aircraft carriers. So you don't necessarily send an aircraft carrier strike group into the Baltic Sea, but you can have destroyers, submarines, etc. And here's the problem with the Baltic Sea. In 2012, President Obama withdrew a brigade combat team, which sounds like a small number of people, but it's thousands of troops from Central Europe. And the result of that was to signal a mission accomplished moment. And that led partially to the Ukrainian crisis, to Russia moving into Ukraine. At the moment, if Russia could win, very much so, a short, sharp war in the Baltic Sea basin, meaning moving troops into, say, the eastern part of Estonia or Latvia, and then declaring a ceasefire before NATO could even get mobilized.
Well, it's a Crimea redux, but we have a history of the Crimea is some form of Tsarist outpost. Are those three Baltic states, do they have the same emotion with Moscow? Are they a Tsarist or a Soviet outpost?
No, it's more ambiguous, because the Baltic states only came under the direct control of the Soviet Union at the very beginning of World War II. Ukraine, which includes Crimea, is where the Russian Empire began in the 9th century. So Ukraine has real emotional historical appeal to Russians, whereas the Baltic states are slightly more ambiguous. But also, from the point of view, and you have to think of Putin as a Soviet man. You know, for him, reconstituting the empire, which he's trying to do, is reconstituting in some subtle form the former Soviet Union, which means the Baltic states, it means Ukraine, it means having a buffer zone right through to Central Europe.